Thank you, Dr. Myers. I have a background in tennis. I'm a competitive player. I am ranked 22nd in the Pacific Northwest for singles. I won 4 USTA tournaments. My doubles partner and I were first team all-league last year, and this year we won doubles team of the year. To pick my topic, I wanted to look at ways to improve my tennis game. Powerful serving is really vital, especially in the men's game, to winning matches, and it's getting more and more important. But there's multiple techniques available for people to use. I wanted to look at, is one technique more efficient at creating speeds than another technique? So the two most popular techniques while serving are the straight-up techniques and the pinpoint technique. Here's an example of a straight-up technique hit by Roger Federer. As you can see, the legs are kept separate through the entire of the serve. He jumps into the court, approximately 12 inches. That's where the power comes from. This is body momentum moving forward. And he gets a push off the back leg to move forward, and the front leg drops up to the ball. So that's where the power comes from, is really from the back leg. In a pinpoint serve, the legs are brought together before you go up to hit the ball. This allows for a deeper knee bend from the player, and he explodes up to the ball using both legs. There's more upward thrust generated, which adds to the power, but there's a drawback that there's less body weight moving into the court. There's more weight moving up to hit the ball. So the importance of my test was it's going to provide useful information for people on ways to improve their serving speeds, which is going to up the level of play worldwide, and help people win more matches. When serving, there's more to it than just pure speed. Placement and spin are very important, especially on a second serve. In a first serve situation, you want to hit the ball hard and flat. You want to hit the top speed you possibly can. You have a high percentage of winning the point if you get it in bounds, but a low percentage of getting it in bounds. On a second serve, it has to go in bounds or you lose the point automatically to a double fault. This is because people use heavy spin and it's much slower and placement's vital. This is a high percentage to get in bounds, but it's a lower percentage of getting it to winning the point. Why did I focus on speed? I disregarded consistency and just focused on velocity for my test. This was because it's what separates a good server from a great server, and players can dominate if they have a really high power first serve, and not many players do. So my test, I figured it wasn't viable to test a straight-up player against a pinpoint player and just look at their speeds, because that's based off of skill. So what I did is I took players and made them hit both kinds of serves, and then compared them against themselves, and using their preferred stance as a control. And I analyzed the changes in speed. So if we see a big drop in the speeds when they have to use their off stance, that's expected because they're not used to it and they're not comfortable with it. They have much less experience. If the speeds stay the same or even increase, then their off stance is a much more efficient way of serving because they don't have experience and they can hit as fast or even faster as a normal serves, then it's much more efficient. I wanted to test first and second serve situations for my test because if one technique is more beneficial, I wanted to show in all scenarios, not just for a first serve or second serve. Constants for my test is that all players got a brand new can of balls. They all serve from the same place on the court, and I only counted serves that landed in bounds. I used the same radar gun, the Bushnell Velocity radar gun, and environmental conditions were the same throughout each individual test. I compared people against themselves, so they had to be consistent through each test, but not the same for everybody. And players used their own preferred rackets. This was to maximize their control and comfort and focus on their leg work and not so much their rackets. And the procedure for collecting the data was the same for all. To pick my test subjects, I looked at who was around me. I looked at my teammates. I used male high school level varsity players. They had to be able to comfortably hit a flat and slice serve. And I picked 5 players who prefer the pinpoint stance and 5 players who prefer the straight up stance. Here's a copy of my human informed consent. It just says that they hit about 20 serves for me for my test. In my test, it started with a warm-up where players could hit whatever they wanted, wherever they wanted, just to warm up their arms and get comfortable. Once the test started, they had to hit a minimum of 20 serves, all from the right side of the court. 5 flat serves with their preferred stance, and 5 flat serves with their off stance, and then 5 slice serves with their preferred stance, and 5 slice serves with their off stance. And the different stances were explained to the player before each test, and they could take some practice serves if they wanted. The test, I clocked the ball as it bounced on the opposite side of the court. The radar gun trigger is pulled before it and released after the ball's passed through. I only counted serves that landed in bounds to really focus on velocity, but they had to be legal serves for me to count them. and they had to get 5 in of each serve to move on to the next section. And if players did get tired, we took a break immediately because I need speeds at top level, and I didn't want any injuries. My hypothesis was that if the pinpoint serve is used, then the higher speeds will be generated because it allows utilization of both legs rather than just the back leg. And just a side note, the flat serves should be faster than the second serves because of friction. As the ball spins, the fuzz on the outside of it catches the air particles, and this causes it to change direction, but it also slows it down. Here's a picture of me collecting data from one of my teammates. And here's the data that I collected from him. Each test subject got a number 1 through 10, and this player preferred the pinpoint stance. Over there. I looked at their preferred speeds for flat, off speeds for flat, and the difference between them, and the preferred speeds for spins, off stance for spins, the difference, and I averaged them. Important figures are highlighted in yellow. Here's the first overall graph of my data. This is looking at speeds hit by using flat serves. The pinpoint players are in green, and the straight-up players are in the orange. This is the first serve situation, and with the preferred stances, the pinpoint players were about 2 miles per hour faster than straight-up players. It's just a bit of a side note. The real difference came when they had to use the opposite stance. Pinpoint players lost 7.32 miles per hour of their serve, which is at 11.3% of their overall speed. That was an expected drop because they're not comfortable with it. The straight-up players only lost 0.8 miles per hour, or 1.3% of their speed, when they had to use the pinpoint stance. This was surprising because they're not used to it. It should have slowed down a lot. And the t-test comparing the drops had a p-value of 0.00382, which signifies a very significant difference in the averages. Here's looking at speeds for the slice serves that they hit. Again, pinpoint players using their preferred stance were about 2 miles per hour faster than the straight-up players. Same trend with the big drop. The pinpoint players lost 5.68 miles per hour, or 10.14% of their overall speed. That was expected. And the straight-up players only lost 0.76 miles per hour, only 1.4% drop. And this supports the hypothesis again that pinpoint is much more efficient at generating speed than the straight-up stance. Here's the really big summary of my data. This is looking at the speeds lost, the change in speeds when they had to switch stance. In red, you have the flat serves. Blue, we have slice serves, and the purple is the average. So the pinpoint players lost on average 6.54 miles per hour, and the straight-up players only lost 0.78 miles per hour on the serves. So again, the drop was expected when you switch stances, but the fact that the straight-up players barely lost any speed, one player actually increased speeds when using a stance he had no experience with, that signifies that the pinpoint stance is much more efficient. And if straight-up players were to switch their stance and then practice with it and train with it, they could increase their speeds by about up to 10%. So pinpoint is better, but why? What it comes down to is effective muscle use. There's 3 main muscles in the legs that are used to generate the upward thrust: the quadriceps, hamstrings, and calves. The pinpoint style is ideal for this because it allows those muscles to be used in both legs rather than just one leg in the straight-up stance. An upward thrust is really what we're looking at here because it's important for 2 reasons while serving. One, it creates topspin. As the racket comes over the ball, it causes it to curve down into the court. This allows players to hit it harder and faster and still keep it in balance and make it a legal serve. It also is the origin of power. Reed from Stanford, he did a similar study, but he did strength in comparison to serve speed. And he found that the speed of your tennis serve comes from the transfer of energy from your legs to your torso to your racket. So it all starts with the legs, and the deeper knee bend, which is allowed in the straight-up stance, really utilizes that and allows for maximum thrust to be generated. Here's an example of the separate knee bends in a straight-up stance on the left. You have the front leg is bent, which is going to push upwards, but the back leg is almost trailing. It's not doing much. In a pinpoint serve, you have both legs cocked together, ready to explode up to the ball. This is utilizing those muscles in both legs rather than just the front leg. Limitations on my test were the players' past experience with the serves. Some had more experience with the other serves than other people did, but this was minimized by comparing players against themselves, not against each other. And players' consistencies and skill were reflected in the standard deviations. The standard deviations were much larger, and the range was much larger for the pinpoint players. I attributed this to, we had our top server in the pinpoint stance. We also had our slowest server as a pinpoint stance player. So we got a really big range of serves there. But again, we looked at the drops in speed, and the drops in speed were much larger for the pinpoint players than the straight-up players. So level of skill is a factor. Improvements to the test was I tested outdoors It would have been nice to get an indoor facility to test and have environmental conditions be stable for everybody, but it's really hard to get that much space for that many people. I used mid-level radar equipment. It would have been nice to use professional grade so I could get really accurate measurements, but mine was calibrated within half a mile per hour, so it's fairly accurate. And test subjects, I was limited to my teammates, only male high school level players. It would have been really nice to test some female players, some adult, maybe some pro players, to see if pinpoint is more efficient for everybody and not just a select group that I looked at. Here's my works cited. Acknowledgements to Ms. Cameron for being my biology teacher and helping me present my findings. Any questions? The question is one technique more difficult than another one to use? This is a bit of a side note. In the men's game, the pinpoint technique is more common. 7 out of top 10 players use it. In the female game, it's about even. Difficulty-wise, there's not that much of a difference. It's basically a transfer of energy. In a straight up, you have to go into the court, which can be a little bit more difficult. But the timing is not that difficult in either serve. I didn't get any complaints from the players using the other stances. The question was, is there a difference in the way you play after the serve if the ball's returned to you between the different stances? I've actually used both in my career as a player. I used to use the straight up stance, but I've actually switched recently to the pinpoint stance and added about 10 miles per hour to my serve. But I don't see much of a difference because you land within about a foot radius of the same place for either kind of serve. So it's just a step backwards to get in the same position. Not that much of a difference. Yeah. The question was, how does the radar gun work in measuring? Does it measure an average or the highest peak? I believe it measures the highest peak value because it shoots almost a cone-shaped laser at a certain area, and the ball breaks it in a time the radar is broken is calculated as the highest speed. Any question?
So, with the two groups that were tested, were there any differences between the players? Like, did a lot of people, begin with one preferred style, like you said, and started with one and then kind of progressed to the other? People, how do they find their preference?
Okay. The question was, how do the players, did they prefer a certain stance to start off? I actually selected 5 players that preferred each stance. I picked 5 players that normally use the pinpoint and 5 players that normally use the straight up stance so that their past experience would reflect in their preferred stance speeds.
You said it's been one player that increases the speed, you think that speed is low.
The question was, did the one straight up player that increased his speed, did that skew my results? It reflected in the results, but it didn't skew it because it was accurate data. He found it more comfortable, and he just never used it before. And he was able to hit higher speeds, so I think that should be reflected in the data. No, not much of an outlier. And overall, they only lost about a mile per hour on their serves when they had to switch the straight up players. So his game was not that much of an outlier. Do I plan to publish my findings? I would like to talk with the American Journal of Sports and Medicine and maybe see if I can get this published because there's been very little research into the comparison between the two techniques. Yeah, the question was, does one technique affect injury more probably? No, there's not that much of a difference in techniques injury-wise or stress-wise, because you both jump up, hit the ball, and you come down at relatively the same speed. Any other questions? Yeah. More commonly, you see injuries in the shoulder or the elbow from serving, and the motion is the exact same for both. The difference is in the legs.